Good morning, faithful listeners. You have tuned in to the P40 Ministries podcast, the one place where you can get a daily explanatory Bible reading to start your day strong. This is your host, Jen, bringing you a brand new episode out of Genesis. Hey, good morning, friends and faithful listeners. This is your host, Jen, with the P40 Ministries podcast. And happy Friday. I'm personally really excited for tomorrow. My husband and I are going to be able to spend the entire day together, which has not happened in a little while, so I'm excited about that. We're actually going to celebrate my birthday tomorrow. Yes, you've probably heard a lot about my birthday this week, and that is because I've had practically a week long of birthday, which has been awesome, and I am so appreciative to everybody on the podcast who has messaged me and wished me a happy birthday. Thank you guys so much. I do appreciate it. But I promise that I will stop talking about my birthday soon here. But let me know what you guys are doing this weekend, and if you have anything fun planned. I love seeing everybody's messages and getting those on Facebook and or the website. So keep sending me those messages, and if you ever need any prayer requests or anything like that, I am here for you and willing to pray for you for whatever you might need. So send those prayer requests over. And let's get started here in Genesis chapter 37, talking about verses 12 through 28 today. So open up your Bibles and turn with me. Also grab that cup of coffee, and let's go ahead and start reading this. And I will be reading out of the WEB version this morning. His brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. Israel said to Joseph, "Aren't your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, and I will send you to them." And he said, "Here I am." He said to him, "Go now, see whether it is well with your brothers and well with the flock, and bring me word again." So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. A certain man found him, and behold, he was wandering in the field. The man asked him, "What are you looking for?" He said, "I am looking for my brothers. Tell me, please, where they are feeding the flock." The man said, "They have left here, for I heard them say, 'Let's go to Dothan.'" Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. They saw him afar off, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Behold, this dreamer comes. Come now, therefore, and let's kill him and cast him into one of these pits, and we will say, 'An evil animal has devoured him.' We will see what will become of his dreams." Reuben heard it and delivered him out of their hand and said, "Let's not take his life." Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit that is in the wilderness, but lay no hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hand, to restore him to his father." When Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him, and they took him, threw him into the pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. They sat down to eat bread, and they lifted up their eyes and looked and saw a caravan of Ishmaelites was coming from Gilead with their camels bearing spices and balm and myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, and let's sell him to these Ishmaelites, and not let our hand be on him, for he is our brother, our flesh." His brothers listened to him. Midianites who were merchants passed by, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit, and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. The merchants brought Joseph into Egypt. So what a sad story this is. This is the story of Joseph and how his brothers sold him to the Ishmaelite traders. In verse 12, we find out that Jacob's sons, or Joseph's brothers, had gone out to Shechem. You remember the city Shechem, had gone back to Shechem to graze the flocks. So they were obviously doing some sort of migrational thing with the flocks, because you remember that Jacob had a ton of flocks. So probably feeding them in one area for too long was bad, because they needed to let the grass grow and everything like that so that the sheep and everything wouldn't starve. So they probably took all of these flocks over to this Shechem region that they had lived in before in order to graze their flocks there. So Jacob calls Joseph over, who clearly wasn't with his brothers, and he's like, okay, so your brothers are out in Shechem. I want you to go to them and bring back a report of how they're doing. You remember the episode I did with Mike 2 days ago? We talked about how Joseph would sometimes tattle on his brothers and bring back bad reports of what his brothers were doing to his father. And so he would tattle on his older brothers, and his older brothers hated him, absolutely hated Joseph, not only because he was their father's favorite son, but also Joseph had this gift of dreaming, and he would sometimes brag about these dreams to his entire family. And even his dad, at one point, even Jacob, got kind of mad at Joseph for one of the dreams that Joseph was talking about to his brothers. From my opinion of Joseph, he seems like an arrogant young man who knows that he is the favored child. And that is just my opinion. But I've heard a lot of different opinions about Joseph. But in my opinion, it seems like Joseph was rather an arrogant young man. His brothers hated him for various reasons, mainly because he was their father's favorite, and their father had given Joseph this beautiful, immaculate coat with all of these colors. This was a very expensive coat, because back then you would have to collect different dyes in order to make a coat of many colors. Nowadays, it's very easy to get something colorful in the stores, but back then it would have been much, much harder. So this was a very expensive, very immaculate, beautiful coat that Jacob, or Israel, gives to Joseph, his favorite son. And the other 11 sons got nothing. Got absolutely nothing from Jacob. So they hate Joseph. So after this, Jacob tells Joseph to go and bring a report back of his brothers. So it almost kind of sounds to me like Jacob is asking Joseph to tattle on his brothers a little bit. Joseph was probably a young man at this point. In fact, I think it says he was 17 years old. Yeah, in verse 2, if you go back, it says he was 17 years old around this time. So Joseph was a young man, and he was able to travel by himself at this point. So he goes to Shechem, in the area of Shechem. He's looking for his brothers. It says he's wandering around in the fields trying to find his brothers. And he comes across this man, and the man's like, what are you doing? What are you looking for? Joseph's like, well, I'm trying to find my brothers. They were grazing near this area last I heard, and I don't know where they're at. So this man says, oh, well, I heard them say that they are going to go down to Dothan. So Joseph goes after his brothers, and he travels all the way from Shechem to Dothan. It says in verse 18 that his brothers saw him afar off. So they saw Joseph coming. And it says they conspired against him to kill him. And they're like, oh, here comes this dreamer. Here comes this little favored child. Here comes this dreamer. And they say in verse 20 here, let's kill him. We are so sick of him. We are sick of how our father treats him. Let's kill him and throw him into one of these pits or cisterns. We will say that this animal came and devoured him. And then they say here at the end of verse 20, let's see what becomes of his dreams of him being greater than us. Let's see what becomes of these. We'll just kill him. Reuben. You remember Reuben was the oldest of all the sons, and he was Leah's son. He was the oldest, and he hears them conspiring against Joseph, and he doesn't want to kill Joseph. So he says to his brothers, no, let's not take his life. Let's just rough him up a little bit. Let's throw him into this cistern over here. Let's just put some fear into him, but let's not kill him, because he is our brother. After all, we shouldn't be killing him. So it says that he said this because he wanted to return Joseph safe and sound to their father. Now that I'm looking at this, I don't know if it's because Reuben wanted to get brownie points with their dad, or if he truly just cared about Joseph's life. I don't know what Reuben's motive was. It could be that he did care about Joseph's life because later on he does get very, very upset about Joseph's situation. But the brothers listen to him and they tear the coat off of Joseph when Joseph gets close enough to them. They tear off this beautiful coat off of Joseph's shoulders. They end up throwing him into this cistern, and the cistern was completely empty. Now, a cistern was almost like this giant well. It would have been a big water holder, basically. It wasn't exactly a well. It was almost like a giant pot in the ground. And this giant pot in the ground would fill with rainwater when the rains came. And that would be a way for the animals to have water rather than drawing it from a well. But this cistern that they threw Joseph in was empty. There was no water in it. So they sat down to eat some bread. And so they're just going about their day and they're eating. They see these Ishmaelite traders coming from Gilead. And their camels had all these spices and myrrhs and balms and all this stuff on their camels. And they're going down to Egypt to trade. Judah, who was the fourth born child after Reuben, Simeon, and Levi. Judah says to all of his brothers, "Look, what's it going to profit us if we kill Joseph? I mean, he is our brother after all. We're not going to gain anything from killing Joseph. Let's sell him and at least get a little bit of money to line our pockets with," is what he says. And he says, let's sell him to these Ishmaelites and let's not kill him. So all the brothers listen. Now in verse 28, there were some Midianite traders that were with these Ishmaelites. So the Midianite traders listen to the brothers and they're like, okay, we'll buy this guy as a slave. And they pull him up out of the pit. The Midianite traders pull him up out of the pit. And they hand the brothers 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph as a captive into Egypt, is what it says. Now, I want to mention something here about the 20 shekels of silver. I don't know if currency was a little bit different back in those days, but during the time of the Levitical law, slaves were typically bought and sold for 30 pieces of silver. And Joseph here was sold for even less than 30 pieces of silver. He was sold for 20 pieces of silver. So his life to his brothers was worth nothing more than 20 pieces of silver. But this is just the beginning of Joseph's story, and much of the next few chapters actually revolve completely around Joseph and his time in Egypt, because it's actually a very, very important story for the Israelite nation. Joseph is one of the most important figures moving forward into Exodus with the Israelite nation, which to me is very, very interesting. I just love Joseph's story. It's just a story of complete redemption and mercy and love by God. So join me on Monday and we'll discuss more about Joseph and this horrible situation that he's gotten into due to his brother's jealousy. So join me then, 6 a.m. But until then, happy listening and God bless.